Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another Friday Ramblings featuring your wonderful host, David Horton. All presented to you by Roulette Productions. Now, we're going to go ahead and jump right into this because, as I advertised before, this is essentially part two of last week's episode. This is the discussion on what happened for the Green Lantern books as a result of the destruction of Coast City in the Reign of the Superman storyline. As I said before, like Superman, the Green Lantern books were not doing sales-wise what DC would have liked to do. The writers were getting ready to have another shuffle, and it was just time, as a lot of people at Marvel and DC were doing in the early and mid-90s, for a shuffling of concepts and a refreshing of characters. Now, unlike Superman, where the idea was to kill off Superman, focus on what the impact of him being around really meant to that version of Earth and what he as a person meant to those who knew him before bringing him back with a slightly new perspective and some more allied heroes who were themselves ready to continue being better heroes to help live up to the Superman legacy that they were so inspired by. Green Lantern, they kind of went the opposite way. Now, it should be noted, I'm going to go ahead and get this out of the way. There is much better research online, but as I said before with Superman, not everything is 100% verified by trustworthy sources, so I'm just going to go with the Cliff Notes version, which is that the story that set all this off, Emerald Twilight, was originally pitched as a different story with a different ending, but right as they were getting ready to publish it, DC decided to go with a different idea, to the point that if you go back and look at the solicitations sent out by DC, a concept that still exists in comics this day, it's kind of integral to the comic book industry, where you, 2 to 3 months out, you publish a list of every book you're going to be publishing with a quick little blurb about what the plot of that month's individual issue is. That a lot of the solicitations were soliciting the original storyline. But we're going to focus primarily on what actually got published, because what could have been is ethereal. Now, I do not have my nice little book props to show you this time because my collection of Green Lantern comics is digital. I did have a few sporadically collected over the years earlier in life, but when the opportunity came to get a good deal on a massive bulk of Green Lantern comic books in digital format, I went with that route. And again, I'm not saying either one is superior to the other. Go with whichever route you want. So, the Emerald Twilight story we got was Hal Jordan was just unable to cope with Coast City being gone, with friends and family, people he grew up with and had known his whole life being gone. And his initial idea as a way to cope, which is not bad therapy in and of itself, was to use his Green Lantern power ring to make a, glowing green construct version of Coast City, populated with people he knew who were speaking to him essentially as his subconscious and helping him, in theory, move on. Problem is, it, like a lot of therapy for people dealing with intense trauma, was going to be a slow process. Hal was fighting the idea that this was okay and that he can go forward with his life. And then the great weakness of the Green Lantern power ring came into play. No, not the color yellow, that the rings have to be charged every 24 hours. And more importantly than that, the rings and their use is dictated by the Guardians of the Universe, who felt that this recreation of Coast City and Hal's reactions while touring it were not so much needed therapy, but petty indulgence of his power and potentially him walking down the path of attempting to use the power of the ring to literally resurrect people. This is a big no-no. And of course, in real life, anybody's going to tell you that if you're damaged, you should not be the one dictating the terms and conditions of your therapy sessions to hopefully stop being damaged. Kind of goes back to an old line of, how's a crazy person supposed to make themselves sane? The nature of being crazy is they don't know what sanity is. Now, you can debate the legitimacy of that. It's kind of a half jest, half reality statement. Please don't obsess with that line too much, folks. But the base idea was that the Guardians did not approve of what Jordan was doing. His ring running out of power gave them the moment they needed to interrupt Hal and tell him that they did not approve of what he was doing with the ring, and that he was to use the remaining charge on it to go to the Green Lantern Corps' home base of Oa, where he would have a talk with his supervisors and face disciplinary action. Now, in and of itself, again, if you look at this as the fact that the Green Lantern Corps is a job, this is not 100% wrong of the Guardians to do. They knew Hal was walking down a dark path and attempted to intercede. The problem is the Guardians have never displayed a lot of sympathy and empathy as a race, and they came off very cold and way too businesslike in their manner. The result is Hal instead reacted very angrily and told the Guardians he was going to Oa to beat the snot out of them and take all the power he needed from the Corps and the Central Power Battery to do whatever he flippin' wanted. The situation was exacerbated when the Guardians' response to this was to send out several Green Lanterns to oppose Hal Jordan on his trip from Earth to Oa. He tore through them, took their rings, leaving them for dead. He did say in his thought balloons that there should be enough residual energy in them, their bodies, to preserve them until other members of the Corps could retrieve them. He did not intend to kill them, but again, he was still going down a very slippery slope very fast. He gets to Oa, continues to berate the Guardians and claim that he does not work for them, he is not their slave, he has the right to restore what was stolen from them. The Guardians again disagree and resurrect Sinestro, whose corpse had been stored in the Central Power Battery, Sinestro being the great rogue of the Green Lanterns. Sinestro promptly declares that he is more than happy to whoop Hal Jordan's butt and potentially kill him, and that win or lose, Sinestro had the glory of seeing Hal Jordan himself, the one who often beat Sinestro down and stopped his plans, that Hal Jordan had become a rogue himself. Jordan's response is to kill Sinestro, along with the last of the active, in good standing Corps members, his good friend Kilowog. He then absorbs all the power in the Central Power Battery and kills all the Guardians except for one, Ganthet, who had been portrayed up to this point as the one most sympathetic to the Green Lantern Corps and the emotional and mental struggles they went through, as well as having at times been a personal friend to Hal Jordan. Hal Jordan rechristens himself Parallax and goes off to do what Hal Jordan feels like doing. He would show up a few times as a villain, basically believing that his schemes to reboot the universe was all a matter of doing what any hero should do, and that is fix bad situations. For the Green Lantern book itself, Ganthet made one last power ring and battery that did not require the Central Power Battery, as it was, as I said, tapped, dry, and dead. removed the yellow weakness to make it more effective, and took it to Earth, where he appointed Kyle Rayner, random schmuck artist, as the last of the Green Lanterns. As with the destruction of the central power battery, all the other Green Lantern power rings went deactivated. This led into the new Green Lantern status quo, where the concept of Green Lantern was now a rookie hero, much like the Superboy and Steel we had previously mentioned, trying to figure out what it means to be a hero and how to do it with the power he has, and how not to overdo his power, along with the fact there is no Corps and there is no Guardians. Ganthan himself disappeared, probably off to, heal his wounds and give Rayner himself a chance to step up his game without having a babysitter constantly over him, as Ganthan conceded that was one of the problems of the old Guardians of the Universe, their cold-hearted administrative ways. Even though Ganthan was a relatively emotional Guardian, again, slippery slopes, people. Kyle Rayner would meet up with a lot of DC heroes over the 10 years that this was the status quo for the Green Lantern books. He would also encounter Parallax himself, and in his own little ways, slowly turn Hal back to the path of redemption. This would all culminate in the 3-part miniseries Final Night, in which the Earth's sun was being consumed by this cosmic parasite thing called appropriately a Sun Eater, and which itself is an old concept from previous Legion of Superhero stories, which is a superhero team set in the far future. They would make references to Sun Eaters. And in the end, Hal Jordan uses the power of Parallax to not only take out the Sun Eater, but reignite Earth's sun, dying in the process. Doing what he felt was right and dying a hero. Well, that was about 5 years after Kyle took over. Kyle continues to be Green Lantern. Works with Alan Scott, the Golden Age Green Lantern, who was never connected to the Corps and whose power came from a different place. But it was similar enough. He served as a good mentor to Kyle. Alan Scott's daughter, the similarly powered, but through nature, Jade, who Kyle Rayner actually had a very intimate romantic relationship with. Along with him also dating longtime Teen Titan at a different point in time, because Kyle's not a jerk, but he also had a romantic relationship with Donna Troy, longstanding member of the Teen Titans, which was the thing. Both those relationships ended badly. And so shortly after Hal Jordan dies, in a heroic sacrifice, he's given the opportunity to become the Spectre's mortal host, allowing him to further show that he is repentant for the bad things he did as Parallax and during the nervous breakdown from Emerald Twilight. But he's not quite 100% resurrected and revived. He's kind of between life and death, as is the nature of the Spectre. Meanwhile, while all this is going on, Kyle Rayner is given an opportunity to restore the central power battery and the Guardians, which means that the last couple years or so that Kyle Rayner is running around as the last Soul Lantern, the Guardians are kind of laying the groundwork to restart the Green Lantern Corps. This all culminates in the Green Lantern Rebirth story, which separates Hal from the Spectre, retcons that the whole Parallax thing was a ancient cosmic entity of fear that was possessing Hal had actually attached to him shortly before Emerald Twilight, and then Destruction Coast City was the emotional event Parallax needed to take full control of Hal Jordan. So he's separated from Parallax, and the Corps is restarted. Characters are, over the next couple years, resurrected. New writer Geoff Johns begins an epic several years run on Green Lantern that produces some of the all-time great Green Lantern Corps stories. I'm going to say the best Hal Jordan stories, but the Green Lantern Corps stories. Now, the biggest key to all this, though, is he keeps Kyle Rayner as a character who now has the confidence he needs to be a solid Green Lantern in his own right, and is actually treated with a lot of respect as the one who kept the legacy of Lantern Corps going when there was literally nobody else to do it. Which is a major big thing, because usually when you have a major status quo changing thing that involves introducing one character who is the big person being pushed by a given writer, and then a next writer comes in with a big plan to do another status quo shakeup, one of the things they do is shove the other character in the closet. Geoff Johns didn't do that. He saw the use of Kyle Rayner as somebody who could bridge the gap between the old era of the Corps and the new era of the Corps, as somebody who wasn't around in the old era but has learned to respect what that old era was. Now, as for the actual Kyle Rayner era, a lot of people do tend to look down on it as he was sole Green Lantern, which was the first time that had really been done well and truly since Alan Scott and the Golden Age, which, because there was no concept of the Corps, Green Lantern was just done to be a solo hero with a magic ring. Although it should be noted, in the early few years of Hal Jordan's run, the Corps was not featured prominently. Because the focus was on establishing him as a character and a hero, and the Corps was kind of a background concept. But, you know, so a lot of people don't like the whole no Corps, a lot of people don't like the rookie hero thing, and some folks just don't like the writing of it. Kyle Rayner got some new villains of his own. Some were new villains that were legacy villains, essentially reboots of some of Hal's old villains, such as Sonar. And some of them were just plain random characters from Green Lantern, from around DC Comics, that may have had a passing familiarity with the concept of the Green Lanterns, but were not major arch rivals of Hal Jordan. Frankly, my biggest problem with the Kyle Rayner era is that Kyle spends a lot of time about it just beating himself down and seeing himself as failed and flawed, and focusing on the bad things that have happened to him. Specifically, his girlfriend that's there when he debuts, who helped him decide to definitely use this power ring to be a big hero, and like the third issue of Kyle's run, is killed by this, again, one of these villains that had kind of bounced around the DC universe, who went on to become a major antagonist for Kyle. And it's just kind of one of those things. It's like every time the writer gets bored, he does a story where Kyle's like, "Oh God, Alex, I failed you. You died because of me." And it's like, dude, we get it. We get it, but life is about moving forward. And it's like, the only time he wasn't moping about Alex's death was when he was shacked up with another female, usually a female superhero. And it made him harder to get around as a character. It's like, yes, Spider-Man is inspired by Uncle Ben and his wise words of wisdom, which is, I guess, is a little redundant to say wise wisdom, but Spider-Man doesn't sit there in every other story arc go, Uncle Ben, you died because of me. No, the writers have learned to pace out the Uncle Ben references. And when they do make them, try to make it more of a motivating factor, not beating yourself up. So, you know, that's the thing is, the 10 years Kyle was the Lone Lantern, on a whole, it was not a great run. I'm not going to say they were the worst Green Lantern books ever written, because the truth is a lot of the Hal Jordan stuff in his solo books was incredibly weak. Hal Jordan definitely worked better as a member of the Justice League when he could play off his good friend Barry Allen, the second Flash, or when he was doing stories involving the other Green Lantern Corps members such as Kilowog, Guy Gardner, John Stewart, Aricia, sometimes all of them at once when you did have the Green Lantern Corps book. But, you know, it's just kind of, it depends on what kind of tone you like in your comic books. And it's one of those things, like, I love Geoff Jones' Green Lantern Corps run, because he really did a lot to take the base idea of the Green Lantern Corps, respect it, but constantly push it forward, and he was wonderful about balancing screen time for the existing characters, the new characters he introduced and built up, and the greater stories he would tell, which would culminate in these big event stories, sometimes involving the rest of the DC universe, like the Sinestro Corps War and Blackest Night and its follow-up Brightest Day. But the thing about it is, you can't really have that run without the Kyle Rayner run that came before it, because that's kind of the point. You have to have the tearing down of the concepts and the cooling off of the concepts of the Corps and the Guardians to do a fresh-faced rebuild that still respects the past. But as I said at the beginning of this video, the amusing thing is, it was all set off by a Superman story. And obviously the Green Lantern office coordinated with the Superman office about doing this. Because as I said, this was a time where a lot of things were happening in DC Comics. Batman had his whole getting his back broken by Bane around the same time period, and Azazel temporarily taking over as the new Batman with a super armored look. I'm probably not going to do a video on that, at least not anytime soon, because I have not read those actual issues, so it's harder for me to comment on the pros and cons of that era. But it's one of those things that just makes it all work. So even though the Kyle Rayner era may not be your cup of tea, even though the Kyle Rayner era, in hindsight, may not have been the best idea, it was certainly, as we discussed at the start of the video, kind of a last-second idea. in the greater picture of what came after and why what came after worked the way it did, you do have to have that era. And the whole idea is that all of it being set off by a Superman story, because Metropolis and Coast City are on the same planet, that is what makes a shared universe great. When you can have a story that's not a company-wide event that involves every title the company's putting out for 2, 3, 4, 5 months, contributing blatant tie-in issues, but a event that's more about just, hey, we got a handful of books all published around this one superhero, let's do a story taking place throughout all 4, 5, 3, whatever, how many books. And somebody's like, hey, what if, in order to give this story some more punch, we have a ripple effect across this other book? And that's the shared universe done right. You don't have to have a huge crisis event to affect multiple heroes at the same time. You can have smaller, significant stories. So, yeah, I mean, that's it. That's basically what we're trying to get addressed in this video, and why I did it as a immediate follow-up to the Death and Return of Superman videos, is because it was all tied together, and ultimately the idea is that even if a story doesn't work immediately for you, even if you're not all about the current status quo change, that doesn't mean in the long run you can't learn to appreciate what that refreshing of concept and that tearing down of concept is about, just like we did with Superman by killing him and focusing on the fallout of killing him and the idea of other people trying to steal his legacy or live up to his legacy. You can't have a rebuilding without a tearing down. It's all in about how you tear down and how everything is paced. So, if you can find the Kyle Rayner era of Green Lantern books for a good price, because I know a lot of times you can get these big digital bundles relatively cheap, and you are vaguely familiar with the Green Lantern books that came after, I would give them a try. You may not like them. You may like them but not love them. You may flat out despise them. But if you do want to understand Green Lantern history, if you do want to appreciate different ways character concepts and superhero legacies can be taken down, put aside, reimagined, and then built back up better than ever, that is what those books are all about. And as I said, Kyle Rayner did work with the Justice League and during the Teen Titans during his era as the Soul Lantern, so if you have read all the Justice League books, you would have seen him in those books, and this gives you a chance to see him on his own and the things he did that kind of built him up to the point he could be a member in good standing and peer in the Justice League. We didn't really touch on Guy Gardner too much in this video. He was alive during the Kyle Rayner Soul Lantern era. He had, a few years before, been kicked out of the Corps because he was a jerk. And one of the immediate aftermaths of Emerald Twilight was him losing his yellow ring that he had stolen off Sinestro. Sinestro's dead body, I should specify. And and he kind of, in his solo book, had this period of time where he was half alien and had these powers where he could morph his body into weaponry. It wasn't a good era for Guy Gardner. One of the things Rebirth did is they got rid of those powers, got him back in a Green Lantern power ring, and we pretty much just, by and large, pretend that era doesn't exist. The only really good thing about that era was, as a solo hero that was no longer connected to the Corps and having to, in his own self-centered, short-tempered way, try to forge his own legacy within the Corps and its greater legacy, he did cool down his temper. So if you really are a Guy Gardner-centric character, okay, go get those issues of Guy Gardner Warrior. But I've read through them, and they're, as I said, unless you're a hardcore Guy Gardner fan, you're probably not going to enjoy them all that much. They technically do have a long-term effect, and again, I give all the credit in the world, Geoff Jones, for that. But it's just one of those things. It was just an awkward time for the character. It was an awkward time for DC. We're going to move forward. Next week, we're going to have the different corners of pop culture and entertainment covered. Probably going to discuss some movie love, maybe some TV show love, just because we haven't done that recently. You know, I'm trying not to go too long a time just focused on a particular thing. You know, work in a relatively rhythmic rotation, because not everybody likes everything and wants to hear me ramble on about everything, so it's going to give people who just want to see talk about a certain corner less time to wait. But hopefully everybody watches my episodes, and remember what we always say. Just plain hating is wrong. Constructive criticism is awesome. So you don't have to sit there and devote yourselves to something. You don't have to like it. But show some respect for the fact that somebody put their heart and soul into creating it. Criticize, but criticize constructively. Because that is good feedback. That is what moves things forward and helps us all enjoy our entertainment. Because it is entertainment. It should entertain you. Enjoy it. Come back next week. Hopefully it'll be entertaining. Till then, take care of yourselves.